Sorry about that long-winded explanation, but I thought it was important to explain why this recipe works so well and what sets it apart from the typical jailhouse wine teenager making hooch in the closet type of recipes. So the first thing we'll do here is just open this up and pour out a little bit of juice and drink it, just to make a little bit of room in the jug, because you don't want this filled right up to the top when it's fermenting, because it can bubble out a little bit. It's not as nearly as big of a deal with something like this as it is with beer. You know, beer fermentation will get really foamy and bubble up, but that's pretty good. A good quality juice will definitely help. I like this Musselman's, or sometimes I get Apple and Eve when they don't have this. I've also used the really cheap Great Value brand apple juice from Walmart, and it's not as good, but it's still decent. So you can use as good or as cheap as a juice as you want. And then I'm just going to pour some into this pan, which is clean. It just looks kind of gross from cooking on a campfire with it. And the amount that I pour in here really doesn't matter. We just need enough to dissolve the sugar and stuff in it. That was a bit less than half of the jar. As far as the amount of sugar, I've used between half a cup up to, done at least a cup and a half. I might have done 2 cups. The more sugar you use, the more alcohol you will have in it. The less you use, the better the flavor will be, really, because the increased amount of alcohol makes it taste a little bit harsher and produces, more stuff in there that will, be little bits of off flavors and things. It's about, I'm going to use a full cup in this one. I've got 3/4 in there now. Half a cup of sugar will give you, I would just, roughly estimating by taste, maybe 3.5–4% alcohol. 1 cup will be maybe like a strong beer, not a super strong beer, but a little bit strongish craft beer type of alcohol level. And you can make it as strong as you want. You could try this with no added sugar, which would actually be more traditional as far as the type of ciders that farmers used to drink all day, like in the song. Would have had very low alcohol content, but we'll add in 1 cup. The tea bag is already in there. The yeast nutrient is close to hand here, so I will just put in approximately a teaspoon, which is about all that was left in this little bottle. About a teaspoon per gallon is what is actually recommended on the bottle, so I guess that's a good amount. I'll put in some extra molasses now. I'm just going to eyeball it, but I'll go for maybe 1.5 tablespoons to 2 tablespoons, something like that. That's probably good. Ooh, I think I actually might have put in more than I bargained for in there, but that's alright. And I'll throw in a handful of these cranberries. I was going to try this for Thanksgiving, this past Thanksgiving, but I never got around to it, so I'm trying it now, and I'll put in, just a handful of cranberries. Like I said, normally I would use raisins. I know raisins come out really good. I've never done cranberries before, so this is just an experiment. So there is all of the ingredients except the yeast, which of course we won't put in now because that would kill it. So I'll bring this down to the stove and heat it up, and then I'll be back. So I let this stuff just come up to a boil, stirring occasionally just to make sure all that sugar dissolves and none of it gets stuck to the bottom and burns. And then I let it sit for a little bit, 5 or 10 minutes, just to give that tea bag some extra time to steep. We can get rid of that now. And we'll go ahead and pour it back into our jug here, which will be also our fermenting container. And I did go and find a funnel, which is a bit gourmy looking, but I did wash it. I've got a whole kitchen full of mutated and gross looking implements, it seems. But I'll pour this in. You can do it without a funnel, but it makes it a whole lot easier to try to do this and film the video at the same time. And some of those cranberries are going to go in, and some don't, or raisins if you're using them, some of them won't. Doesn't matter if you get them all in because they've done their job basically. So we'll put the yeast in now. And so this is all in the jug now. We have all our ingredients in there, and that mixture from the pan was fairly hot still, so it's warmed this up. You don't want it really hot when you put the yeast in because that'll kill it. You want it around, a lot of things will say around 80 something degrees. In really old books on doing this, sometimes they will say blood temperature, which is 90 something. And as far as the amount of it, more yeast doesn't make it stronger. Also, more yeast doesn't really make it ferment any faster. You want to put in roughly half a packet if you have one of these 11 gram packet. I'm sorry, not half a packet, a fifth of a packet. This packet is generally considered to be enough for a 5-gallon batch. We're making a 1-gallon batch, so theoretically we could do 5 of them. And I've already used this for a couple. And so I'll put in, I don't know, I'm just kind of eyeball about a teaspoon. And the amount isn't critical. And the reason why more yeast doesn't make it get done faster is because when this yeast hydrates and gets active in there, it's going to start reproducing and multiplying pretty rapidly. I've read somewhere or other that the amount of yeast organisms, the number of yeast organisms in this will double roughly every 20 minutes. So putting in 2 teaspoons of yeast as compared to 1 teaspoon of yeast will speed up your fermentation by approximately 20 minutes. So you don't need a huge amount. You also don't really need to worry about being super stingy with your yeast, but you can easily get 5 batches like this out of one of those packets of yeast. Keep your costs down, and then we'll just shake it up a little bit to distribute the yeast and also kind of oxygenate this a little bit. Shake that up and get some oxygen in it. Okay, so now we are way into dangerous territory with this batch here because things are going a little odd. So you can see the bubbles coming up the side there, and that's what you want to see by the next day. It lets you know that the fermentation is going. You might even see it going like this within a few hours if conditions are really ideal, but you should see this by the next day. If not, something might be wrong. And for me, this is not the next day. This is probably, I think this is 4 days later since I put the yeast in. And I had a problem with mine because my yeast that I used, this Nottingham yeast, was really old. I completely forgot how old this yeast was when I went and did this. This has been open in my refrigerator for probably close to a year. And I totally forgot how long it had been in there. I just came across it, thought, hey, I'll make a batch of that cider. I got the juice and stuff and mixed it up. And it didn't occur to me until the next day, when it was still not really doing anything, that something was amiss there. And that yeast, I'm sure, was the problem. I just had it sitting around too long. So what I did when it wasn't bubbling yet by the next day is I added some more yeast and shook it up real good to maybe try to get a little more oxygen in there and put it in a warm spot, which is something I've done before when the fermentation is a little sluggish to take off, which will happen mainly if it's cool in the house, which it is lately. So I put more yeast in, another good dose in, shook it up, put it right next to a heater for a day or two, and it still wasn't really doing anything until finally, maybe yesterday or so, after probably close to 3 days, I was seeing a little bit of bubbles coming up. And now it's coming up and looking more or less like it's supposed to. And you probably can't hear it, but I can even hear it here. And oh, one thing to mention about this recipe as far as the equipment, some people I'm sure are saying, where's the airlock? It's going to go bad and be terrible without the airlock. Well, this particular batch might go bad and be terrible anyways, but not because of the airlock. You don't need an airlock. Just put the cap on, not screwed down tight. Just on there, just to where it just stops, and that's fine, or even backed off a little bit or whatever. The carbon dioxide will come out. This is continuously producing carbon dioxide, and it will be continuously coming out of here, so nothing in the air can really get in there as long as the carbon dioxide is coming out. And the carbon dioxide is heavier than air, so that's theoretically sitting on top of there, not letting excessive amounts of oxygen or bad stuff get in there. So you don't need an airlock or any other kind of brewing equipment for this recipe. But back to some more yeast talk. I also have to make a correction on what I was saying about this yeast earlier. I was saying that this is a low attenuation, high flocculation yeast, which that's your ideal thing. Low attenuation, high flocculation. I was actually looking on the website of this when I was just buying some more yeast just now to replace this. And this is actually described as a high attenuation yeast on the Lallemand website. This is made by Lallemand in Austria. It's good stuff. So obviously it's been working for me pretty good. The attenuation is low enough. It's obviously it's lower than like a champagne yeast or any other real dry wine yeast, or a real, high gravity Belgian ale yeast or something like that. It's much lower, significantly lower attenuation than that, but it is actually described as high attenuation yeast, which is surprising to me. Although the way that I do this, I don't actually let it completely ferment out all the way, so that's partly why I still have the small amount of sweetness that I like in there. This is fermentation going full steam ahead. It's been like this for a couple of days. Let me see now. I mixed this up on a Friday, I believe, and today is Wednesday. So I'm hoping that this will be ready to put in the fridge on Thursday or Friday. Although things were slowed down a bit from that old yeast, which might not have ruined this, it still smells fine. Okay, so it's a couple days later now, and the bubbling has slowed down a bit. Normally I would let it continue until it's, fermenting less than this, till it's a little more fermented out. But it's been 7 days and we were set back a bit by that almost dead yeast that I put in there. That cost us 2 or 3 days there, but I was hoping it was going to be ready for tonight's festivities, so I'm just going to go ahead and proceed with this. It might just be a little bit sweeter than usual. Basically the idea of this method that I'm using is you don't actually let it completely ferment out anyways. So it's just a little bit earlier than usual. And this also gives us another opportunity for a neat thing that you can do with this method, which is carbonation, which is really easy. All you do is put it into some bottles with caps a day or so earlier than you would normally just put it in the fridge. Usually with not carbonating it, I would just, wait till it's going slower than this, put it in a 1-gallon wine jug in the fridge. But put it in those bottles and just leave it in the bottles at room temperature for a day and let that yeast carbonate it, and then put it in the fridge. So I'm just going to put it into 3 of these bottles here and put the rest in my little brown jug and put that in the fridge, so I'll have some for tonight. And actually, before I do that, we'll do a little taste test here so I can see how it came out. Alright, we'll just do a little taste here. You can see the yeast layer that settled to the bottom. That's the advantage of a highly flocculent yeast. High flocculence, less flatulence. That's what I always say. And there's a few cranberries that floated to the top there. Smells good. And that is actually very tasty. It's a little sweeter than my usual, but not bad. That's a really nice flavor. I think those cranberries really worked out. There's definitely more of the apple flavor remaining because it's not fermented out so thoroughly. Wow, that is really good. I was not expecting that to be that good. So, I'm going to just finish this right off here, cranberries and all. Excellent. I thought that batch was going to be ruined when the fermentation didn't start for almost 3 days. So I'm going to fill up these bottles here first. Actually, the thing to do if you can is to try to tip the bottle and funnel so that it runs down the side instead of falling, right down the middle and fizzing up so much. I really surprised myself with how good this came out. This recipe really is something else. I've made big batches of cider before, 5-gallon batches that I, totally fermented out and did, secondary fermentation, bottle conditioned, the whole works, even aged it for, actually over a year. Some of it lasted, and I just didn't like it very much. Mainly, I think, because I made it with champagne yeast, which a lot of people recommended is the thing to use on something like that, and it just came out too dry for my liking. So I might actually try that again. Do a big batch of more conventional methods with maybe my Safe Ale SO4 British ale yeast that I just got in the mail the other day. This method is not really something that you can make a big batch and store it for a long time. This basically goes in the fridge and pretty much have to drink it up in about a week, which has never been a problem for me, but it doesn't last. It'll kind of continue fermenting somewhat, even in the fridge when it's cold, and after a while it's just not as good as when it was fresh. Doesn't really work out well for aging. I'm not really sure what would happen if you took, this same basic recipe and did a secondary fermentation and bottling and all that. It probably would come out pretty good then. But there we go. Got this jug here, about 2/3 full, plus 3 of these bottles. It'll be some nice fizzy sparkling cider in a day or two. And there we have it. This is what home brewing is all about, in my opinion. Like I've already mentioned a bunch of times, I've made many batches of beer, made big batches of wine and all that stuff, and all the equipment, and I haven't done beer in a long time, mainly because I just really got sick of dealing with all the bottles. And I thought, maybe I would get back into it one of these days if I could buy a kegging setup. Get a couple of 5-gallon kegs and the CO2 bottle and all that. And that's just so expensive, and you really can't even save any money by making your own beer. Some of it you can make it cheaper than you can buy it, but not by a lot, and you'll just spend that money on equipment, and you'll drink more beer, which, that's all great. It's a fine hobby. There's nothing wrong with it. But, this kind of brewing like this, it's really cheap, it's easy, it's fun, and you can actually have a drink for practically nothing, This will actually save you a little bit of money if that's something that you're trying to do. So, for the beginner or the veteran, this is it's a great thing to try out. It's different. It's an unconventional way of making a fermented beverage, but as you can see, it works really good. So go ahead and try it yourself, and you can experiment and tweak it whatever way you want to make it your own. So I'll go put my little brown jug in the fridge and get ready for tonight. And thanks for watching.